She paid for everything, the flowers, the music, the dream setting. Yet when the music began, when love was supposed to unite families, she was shoved into the kitchen, forced to watch her only son's wedding through a swinging door between trays of cold food. No name card, no speech, no dance. Just humiliation, served on a chipped plate. But what they didn't know was that silence can be sharper than any scream. Behind the folding chair and the stained floor, a mother's rage was quietly igniting. With one phone call, 3 swift cancellations, she shattered their perfect illusion. And that was only the beginning, because the real story is not about what she lost, but about what she reclaimed. Her dignity, her power, her voice. Stay with us, because what unfolds next will shake everything you thought you knew about loyalty, betrayal, and revenge. Subscribe now to Silent Lies. They led me past the glittering hall and parked me beside a stack of bus tubs, as if I were another piece of equipment that needed to be kept out of sight. A folding chair waited under a flickering exit sign, and the scent of garlic and hot oil pressed close to my skin. When the band struck its first bright chord and the room beyond erupted in applause, the swinging door rattled on its hinges and I caught a sliver of gold light, a brief shimmer of chiffon, and the blur of my son twirling his new wife. I had paid for the flowers that framed their faces, the chairs that held their friends, the vocalist who drew breath for that opening note. I had chosen the linen shade they said photographed well, yet I was stationed here, at the edge of the heat, a napkin tossed over my seat as if someone had been too rushed to pretend decorum. I smoothed the skirt of the mauve dress I had picked because it felt like dignity made of fabric. The chiffon lay soft against my legs, but the chair complained beneath me in a thin creak that sounded like resistance. There was no name card where I sat, no place setting, no glass polished for my hand. A runner brushed past with a squeaking cart and murmured that I was to wait here, that someone would make sure I had a plate, that the bride had a very specific vision for the room. My mouth formed the word vision without sound, as if testing how it tasted. The swinging door snapped again and laughter blew in like a gust before the edge hit the wall and the hall sealed itself from me. I pressed the napkin to my lips and studied the chipped white plate they set down as proof I had not been forgotten entirely. The chicken breast was already losing its heat, boundaries crocheting with grease. I looked at my hands. They were steady, which surprised me. That morning they had trembled while the stylist spun my hair into something smooth and celebratory. 3 hours under a dryer, 3 hours of telling myself that today would be a day of inclusion, not endurance. I had believed it because belief had kept me upright for decades. Belief had pulled me through night shifts and the arithmetic of rent versus braces. Belief had curled around my child like a blanket when he woke screaming from a nightmare and had no one else to climb into bed with but me. The program they handed out at the church was a thing of elegant lies. Cream cardstock, cursive that looped like a promise, names placed like pearls on a string. I searched for myself as if for a pulse. There was her father escorting. There was her mother speaking first. There were readings and hymns and acknowledgments that wove a narrative where my existence was a footnote nobody cited. The door opened, and for a heartbeat, I saw the chandelier hang like a frozen constellation over their first dance. They turned beneath it, and in that brief pain of vision my son did not look toward the kitchen. He did not scan for my face. He did not ask where I had been seated because to ask would mean noticing I was not there. When the door fell shut again, I stared at the peeling rectangle of paint behind the fire extinguisher until its rough edges became my horizon line. I told myself to be quiet. I told myself that mother's honor by disappearing. I told myself that I would not stain his day with my hurt because I had not stained his childhood with my fatigue. I did not raise a scene. I raised a man. The lie of that thought sat heavy in my throat, but I swallowed it because I was practiced at swallowing. The heat from the ovens rolled against my shoulder blades, and from the other side of the door a microphone squealed and settled into the confident timbre of a man who loved the sound of his own approval. To our daughter and her perfect husband. The room roared, and I pictured the head table glimmering like a stage, the floral arch I had funded photographed from a dozen flattering angles, and my absence cropping itself out without effort. A server, barely older than the dress she had been fitted into, asked if I wanted a refill. She could not get the word ma'am to land without apology. I watched her eyes gather guilt that did not belong to her and let her walk away with it anyway, because I did not have room for anyone else's burden. I examined my plate. 3 olives, a corner of soft cheese, a triangle of toast that bent rather than snapped when I tried it with my fingers. I remembered how my son's laugh used to lift in little bursts when sprinklers snapped to life in our summer yard. I remembered the way he once tucked his face into my neck after a flu and breathed like he was borrowing air from me. I remembered, and then I put the memories back on their shelf because they were sentimental and useless, and sentiment does not defend a woman from erasure. The door opened wide enough that I could see the bride's profile. She was radiant in the way people are when they are well lit and fully certain the world is arranged to flatter them. She looked right at me, not by accident, not startled. Her smile did not bend into sympathy. It settled into place like a final piece in a well-planned tableau. I saw in that expression the neatness of a decision already justified. The kitchen was not a mistake. It was the solution to a problem I represented in photographs, a problem called the wrong shade, the wrong story, the wrong mother on the wrong side of the narrative. My heart did not race. It slowed and clarified. The hum I felt was the engine of a woman who has been told to be grateful and for once declines. I watched the service choreography collapse and reform around me. Clanging trays, quick hands, a called-out request for a gluten-free plate at table 12. I stepped aside to make room, and in that sidestep, something small inside me slid into position. It was not the sound of a brake. It was the click of a lock. People like to imagine that power is loud. They think it arrives with shouts and slammed doors. Mine came like a tide turning so gradually that you mistake the movement for your own imagination until you look down and notice your feet are no longer where you left them. I took out my phone in the pocket of my dress. The case had the faintest scratch from a drop weeks ago, a small white line, almost decorative. I scrolled to the florist, the band, the bar service. The numbers were all there because I had been the one who organized them. I had taken the calls on my breaks, negotiated upgrades in the hospital cafeteria, sent deposits while standing in a grocery aisle holding a carton of eggs in the crook of my elbow. The first message I drafted with care, as if I were writing a thank you note. Please cancel the Sunday delivery. Thank you for your time. The second required even fewer syllables. We will not need the additional set. The third was a formality disguised as courtesy. Please remove the second shift from the invoice. I hit send on each with hands that did not shake. The band would pack up a little early. The bar would stop before the night had been drowned in sweetness. The brunch would sit under plain light without flowers crowning it like a crown it had not earned. I imagined the small disappointments spreading through the party like hairline cracks. Not enough to collapse the room, just enough to make the gloss catch the light differently. Beyond the door, my son lifted a glass. He poured gratitude over the room in a general wash that left no one saturated, and me quite deliberately dry. I had imagined my name spoken into that microphone. I had scripted a simple sentence in my head, nothing ornate, only a recognition that love has labor at its core. Instead, I heard the applause crest for her parents, and the sound came to me thin and metallic through the air vent, like a recording of a celebration I did not attend. I placed the plastic fork back on the plate and stood. The floor under my heel was sticky in one spot, as if someone had spilled gravy and wiped it with a napkin instead of a mop. I eased the swinging door just enough to let the bright bleed across my hands and watch the dance floor throb with good intentions. This is what they wanted, an image. And images have edges. Someone had set me just outside the frame so the picture could be clean. So I stepped all the way out of it, into my own composure, into the corridor that led to the side exit where the air smelled like wet pavement and the night lifted its cool face to mine. I made the calls there, with the door behind me and the party ahead, and I did not explain myself to a single person. The night did not need my reasons. It only needed my decision. When I came back in, the kitchen swallowed me again. I sat. I waited. I listened to the clatter of a happiness I had bought. I breathed in and out until the scent of marinara became ordinary. I imagined tomorrow beginning to deform under the weight of my absence. And inside the quiet that followed, the truth arranged itself with the patience of a woman who has spent a lifetime arranging things for everyone else. I was not the wrong color for their photographs. I was the wrong kind of story for their pride. So I wrote a new one, right there, with a phone with a straight back, with the steadiness of a person who knows that silence, when chosen, is not surrender. It is authorship. I did not sleep. The room was too still, the air too rehearsed, as if the hotel had practiced being neutral and overshot into something sterile. I lay on my back in the mauve dress until the seams pressed a faint train of ridges into my skin. The ceiling fan turned with the slow authority of a judge. The scent that clung to me was a collage I did not consent to, kitchen grease, floral perfume meant for other people, and the metal bite of my own sweat. Once, when the ice machine chugged in the hallway, I thought for an instant that the music had started again downstairs. It had not. The party I paid for was muffled by floors and distance, and now, a silence I owned. My phone pulsed in the dark. It had learned to glow a polite, almost apologetic blue. Missed calls stacked like bricks. Messages lined themselves up with the efficiency of an accusation. I did not open them. I already knew the fonts of their concern. I already knew the way people use questions to disguise the shape of their blame. Instead, I reached for the tablet on the nightstand and opened the thing I could trust. The budget. For a year, I had been faithful to a spreadsheet that lived more neatly than real life does. The columns were scrubbed and orderly. Each cell had a number that obeyed. The totals at the bottom marched into place whenever I asked. There, in the glow that left the rest of the room dim, I saw the entire wedding story without lace or speeches. Payments dispatched, deposits promised, balances looming like winter. I could see the venue that once felt humble evolve into a restored barn with chandeliers because the word of the season was elevated. I could see the invitations swell from simple cardstock to hand-lettered art shipped in pale boxes I had recycled on my lunch break. I could see the cake rise in tiers, expanding like the kind of expectation that forgets what it demanded last month. I scrolled. The line items moved under my finger like water, then the surface broke. 2 charges flashed with the nervous energy of something that does not belong. A bar tasting that had never been run past me. A rehearsal dinner that transformed itself into an upgrade, as if simple and kind had been outlawed and no one informed me. I tapped them open, read the notes I was never meant to see, and felt a familiar old organ in my chest reorder itself. It was not outrage. I had outraged myself brittle long ago. This was the opposite. This was a cooling. This was the steadying discipline a nurse learns during a code when a room is turning sharp and there is no time for fury. There was a payment note somewhere else, in a place that was not meant for my eyes but found mine anyway. His mom is covering everything. Might as well go big. The sentence was casual, the tone light, the harm surgical. It explained a great deal in very few words. It sketched the silhouette of a person I had apparently been to them all year. A source, a pipe in the wall. I closed the app and opened my email because I needed language that belonged to me. I wrote 3 messages as if I had done it 100 times before. Please cancel the flowers scheduled for Sunday. The balance is withheld. Thank you for your work so far. We will not require the additional performance. Consider the agreement complete. Please remove the second bar shift from the invoice and do not process the remainder. The sentences stood like small, correct buildings. They did not explain. They did not apologize. They did not plead. I read them once without emotion and pressed send. I watched each whoosh travel into the dark and listened to the air conditioner agree with my decision. The lamp cast a thin gold rim around the tablet. Outside the blackout curtains, the night was draining itself into a bruised blue. I felt the hum again. Deeper now, a slow alignment. Not triumph, not revenge. Something older and cleaner. Authority. The authority that had moved me through the world when I did not have help, when my choices were between the wrong thing and the thing I could survive. I took off the dress and hung it where it would not wrinkle, even though I would never wear it again. I washed the black half-moons of mascara from beneath my eyes. In the mirror, a woman who looked very much like me examined the set of her own mouth and did not find it unfamiliar. The phone, as if offended by being ignored, began to perform. It jittered, paused, hummed, told me that people wanted answers. Daniel wanted context. The bride wanted decorum. Her mother wanted professionalism. A niece I loved wanted the story. I turned the device face down and let their words live without me for once, like the party had. When a hotel cart squealed somewhere near the elevators, I thought of that door, of the cove of light where I had stood and watched my son not look for me. There are absences that echo louder than voices. There are erasures that leave chalk dust on your hands even though you never touched the board. I lay back down and counted each breath as if I were in a waiting room prepared for bad news. The breathing worked. The panic did not arrive. Dawn did. By the time the fan blades revealed themselves clearly enough to count, I had already chosen the day. I showered my skin free of other people's scents. I pulled on jeans and a shirt that felt like honest fabric. The zipper agreed with me and the cotton had the faint good ghost of lavender detergent. I checked out without remarks. The lobby had a floral arrangement that aimed to look spontaneous and failed. The woman at the front desk told me to have a lovely morning in exactly the way a person tells a stranger something they will not remember 10 seconds later. I smiled because I am courteous by habit, and then I took my courtesy and went home. The highway allowed my thoughts to draft behind one another. It is remarkable how a car can be both a capsule and a confessional. The tires made steady promises under me. The radio tried to pick up a song and kept losing it. A hawk hung above the median and then shrugged itself into the distance. With every mile, the picture of the kitchen chair shrank in my rear view. With every mile, the shape of my dining table at home grew in my mind. I wanted a slice of ordinary sunlight across wood. I wanted a quiet that I did not have to defend. My roses were rioting when I pulled into the driveway, pink and reckless, as if they had never heard of restraint. I did not stop to admire them. Admiration is a kind of leisure. I wanted the drawer. I wanted the red folder that had lived so long with older papers that its edges had learned to curl. The envelope inside was the color of a long story. When I slid a finger under the seal and felt old paste give way, I braced myself for tragedy and found something colder: accounting. A record of a secret kept by a man who had exited our lives by dying after he had exited them by leaving. The letters curled and swayed across the page in his slanted hand. He delivered his revelation like a bureaucrat. Facts, then apologies, then a confession that had the audacity to ask for peace. I read every line. I set the page aside, I picked it back up. The first time through, my ribs tightened as if someone had told me to brace for a collision. The second time, a strange steadiness took the wheel. I had been mother by decision, not accident. I had been mother by labor, not likeness. I had been mother in every way that matters, and somehow that was the very role that could be erased when a room needed harmony. The realization did not uproot me. It planted me deeper. If my motherhood had been a set of choices, then so could my future be. I answered emails from vendors in the afternoon. Polite acknowledgments came back. We are disappointed, but we understand. This is unusual, but your request was clear. No refunds within the window. Deposit retained. I accepted each line without flinch because none of this was about money anymore. Money had been the instrument. This was about custody of my own story. I brewed coffee so dark it made the kitchen smell like a promise, and I drank it without sugar like a person who trusts her tongue. The messages on my phone multiplied and then abruptly stopped. The pause tasted like calculation. I could feel the hive regrouping. I could feel timelines being revised, narratives being drafted with careful grammar, a cast of characters under discussion in rooms and threads where I would never sit. I turned the phone off. The room inhaled. The quiet that followed was not the empty kind that demands you fill it. It was the earned kind. Night came without fanfare. I stood at the sink and watched the last line of light drain from the fence. I could have cried then, in the safe privacy of my own kitchen. I did not. Grief would have insisted on being the main character again, and I had other plans. I boiled water for pasta I had wanted for weeks and told myself clearly that this was not a consolation prize. It was dinner. It was mine. Steam lifted in a clean column. I salted the water like someone who expects the food to be good. I remembered 100 times I had eaten standing up while a child's crisis took up the chair. I set the table for one and did not feel foolish. When I was done, I washed the plate, dried it, put it away, and placed the letter in the center of the table as if it were a candle. I sat and looked at it until the ink became just ink again, until it stopped casting shadows longer than it deserved. Then I stood, crossed to the closet, and brought out a small cardboard box. I filled it with frames from the mantel. I wrapped each in an old dish towel. I labeled the lid with a marker. Memories, not obligations. The words were straight and bold and legible. They looked like a woman's handwriting who finally recognized her own signature. The house had learned to be quiet around me. It did not creak to be noticed. It did not protest as I moved from room to room and let my eyes decide what would remain. I stood in the guest room and faced a small dresser that had always required a nudge with the hip to open the top drawer. The wood stuck again, stubborn as habit, and then relented. I was not looking for anything. I was making space. But sometimes the things you are finished carrying step in front of you and ask to be acknowledged one more time. The red folder waited where I had left it, edges softened by years, as though it had been breathing while I ignored it. I had already read the first letter. I had already folded my understanding around the fact that biology had never been the foundation I believed it was. I should have closed the drawer and moved on. Instead, My fingers slid along the folder lining and found a second sheet, thin as a secret, tucked into the sleeve as if the paper had disguised itself as part of the cardboard. It was dated 3 days before he died. The handwriting leaned forward like a man in a hurry to absolve himself. I carried it to the bed and sat. There are revelations that explode. There are others that arrive like a ledger. This one did both. He wrote of a girl too young and too frightened. He wrote of a baby placed in his hands by a person who wanted a different life. He wrote of the lie that followed, the story he invented and allowed to harden into reality because he knew I would be the kind of woman who could hold it. He did not praise me in the letter. He did not ask for mercy. He simply described the mechanics of his failure and the size of the thing he had handed to me without consent. I read it once and the room tilted. I read it again, and the floor grew steady under my feet. I had not been chosen by blood. I had been chosen by a coward who recognized strength when it served him. The facts did not burn, they clarified. The years of work did not dissolve just because someone tried to revise their origin. I had built a family out of intention and repetition, out of early mornings and late shifts, out of 100,000 small decisions that announced love without needing to be named. The letter did not make me smaller, it made my life visible to me. I left both letters on the kitchen table because I did not want to hide from my own knowledge. The paper flattened under my palm. The ink shone a little in the afternoon light. I brewed coffee that tasted like resolve and took the first bitter swallow standing at the sink. The garden hummed. Somewhere in the neighborhood a lawnmower droned and then stopped. The silence that followed felt like a whole new room I had just unlocked. I opened my phone and made a list. Not of grievances, not of people to call and correct, but of guests. Names that had returned to me in the past few days like buoys, proof that I could float without the scaffolding of a role that had demanded my disappearance. Claire from the hospital, who had slid cups of contraband coffee into my locker when the shiftboard chewed me to the bone. Henderson from next door, who cleared my sidewalk after snowstorms before I had my boots on. Denna at the bookstore, who knew the exact kind of story that could hold me when the world was loud. Janet, who stayed late to help me cover when the unit was short. I did not write one family name. Family had become a word I would define for myself. The grocery store smelled like citrus and aisle wax. I pushed a cart that wobbled a little and chose tomatoes that looked like they had been painted, and then decided to be fruit after all. I picked basil that still thought it was a plant. I picked garlic that would have a conversation with the oil if I gave them both a hot pan. I bought a tablecloth the blue of a summer sky crowded with sunflowers. It looked unashamedly cheerful. It looked like something I would have wanted when I was 20 and thought I might travel widely and be photographed laughing on bridges. Back home, I ironed the cloth until it fell smooth over the table, a simple stage that did not demand perfection to perform. I took the frames off the mantel with care and slid them into a box already labeled. Memories, not obligations. The bare wall did not accuse me. It sighed with relief. In the kitchen I found a rhythm that felt like prayer. Water rose to a boil. Salt went in generous as a blessing. Olive oil warmed and released its patient fragrance. The skillet sang when the tomatoes hit and collapsed them into sweetness. I zested a lemon over butter until the air smelled like something bright had decided to live here. Music helped the rooms remember what joy sounds like. Van Morrison swayed through the doorway, then Stevie Nicks. I did not put on mascara. I did not consider Spanx. I wore a linen blouse that let my skin breathe like it mattered. When the doorbell rang for the first time, my heart did not scramble. It stepped forward and opened the door. Claire hugged me like I was not a fragile thing, but a friend who had been found. She handed me a bottle of wine and a smile that meant she saw the outline of me and liked it. Others followed. Laughter blew in with them like a weather system that knew how to water what had been dry for too long. We gathered at a table that had once been a battlefield for math homework and laundry folding. Now it held bowls and plates and hands reaching for more. The napkins were cloth. The silverware shone because I had polished it. Not for show, but for pleasure. Someone told a story about locking himself out of the house in his underwear. Someone confessed to stealing a pen from the bank every week just to feel like life still had small rebellions available. The air filled with the rustle of people being unguarded. I laughed and heard a sound come out of my own mouth that had weight to it. It did not glance off the walls like a performance. It settled into the room like a chair pulled back for someone you love. When there was a pause, Claire lifted her glass and looked at me in a way that did not make me want to shrink, a way that invited me to stand taller without effort. To Margaret, she said, for choosing her own seat at the head of her table. The glasses tipped and met. I felt the tick of the moment inside my chest, the precise second when a story changes key and you realize you have known the melody all along. But now it belongs to you. I stood because I wanted to. My hands did not shake. My voice did not argue with my throat. I looked at each face and spoke the words that had been ripening since the kitchen chair rattled behind a swinging door. To the mothers who stayed quiet for too long. To the women who gave everything and were told it was not on theme. To the ones who built houses and were asked to eat behind them. May we never step out of the photograph again unless we choose the moment and the pose. May our silence, when we practice it, be the kind we own. The toast landed with the soft thud of certainty, and then the conversation moved on to recipes and travel plans and the joke Mr. Henderson always tells wrong. This is what belonging sounds like when it is not borrowed. Forks pinging against plates, a chair scraping and no one flinching, a bottle opening without apology. The night did not ask me to perform. It did not require me to be inspirational. It offered me a seat, and I took it. Later, after dishes had been rinsed and left in tidy stacks, after hugs had been given like promises, after the porch lights had turned the yard into a small constellation, I stood alone in the kitchen and listened to the house breathe. The letters still rested on the table, but they no longer felt like explosives. They felt like documents in a file that had been resolved. I did not place them back in the drawer. I did not hide them from myself. I let them lie there in the open as a reminder that the truth had not destroyed me. It had returned me to myself. I blew out the candle and watched the last thread of smoke unfurl into the room. The scent of rosemary and garlic lingered like the afterimage of a smile. I turned off the light and stepped into a hallway that was mine. Somewhere beyond my front door, people were composing versions of me that fit their comfort. Let them. I had finally chosen the narrative that fit my life, and it had a table with real chairs, a blue cloth, and my name spoken without hesitation. The silence became a habit that fit. It did not buzz. It did not ache. It settled into the house like a fog that clears your head instead of clouding it. By the end of the week, the mantel was bare. The box on the hall table labeled in my neat hand, and the air smelled like lemon oil and something honest. I moved through rooms that remembered me. My phone lay face down on the counter. Obedient, dark. It had learned that it did not govern me. The knock came just after noon, not pleading, not angry, only persistent. The kind of knock a son assumes will always be answered. Through the frosted glass, the outline of his shoulders looked smaller than I remembered, as if the suit had been carrying him on the wedding day more than he had carried the suit. I stood barefoot on the cool floorboards and let the seconds pass, because waiting had been required of me for so long that I wanted to feel how it was to make someone else wait. Then I opened the door. "Hi, Mom," he said, as if the word itself could rewind a week. My throat felt clean and unused. I stepped aside without answering, and he walked in, eyes skimming the empty mantel, registering the missing frames the way a person registers a wind change. "Where are the pictures?" he asked. But the question did not contain the person who had once said, "Where were you sitting? Are you warm? Are you all right?" He sat where I pointed, in the chair that had held me while I drank coffee in the hour between night and morning, and decided to be a woman who chooses. We lived inside the pause for a while. The hum of the refrigerator kept time. A bird rattled the gutter and the sound moved away across the roof like a thought. He ran a hand through his hair. I did not soften at the boyhood gesture. I had paid in softness and the debt had been deemed a tip. I did not plan to leave one today. "I did not come to fight," he began. And the sentence did what it always does. It begged me to reassure him that a fight would not happen. I refused the old prompt. "Good," I said. "Let us not." He blinked as if the floor had tilted and then went on. "I do not understand what happened. 1 minute things were fine. The next there were cancellations, and then you posted that check, and people are talking, and I do not know what you are trying to prove." My name was a door he did not try. There was no "I am sorry" in his mouth. No question that included my heart. He wanted a diagram that justified his discomfort. I stood without agitation and crossed to the hallway closet. The cardboard box was light and very heavy. I set it on the coffee table and lifted the lid. Receipts. Venue deposits and upgrades he had requested because an extra stretch of dance floor felt like ambition you could walk on. Cake tiers and calligraphy, and the neon sign that announced a forever I had bankrolled. I did not narrate. I arranged stacks like evidence on a clean surface. He looked down as if the paper might burn his eyes if he stared. I waited. Waiting did not cut me anymore. It was simply a way of letting seconds do their job. I placed the letter on top, the one in his father's hand, the one that spoke plainly and late. He recognized the script before the words and his mouth thinned. He read. The muscles near his cheekbones tightened and then let go. He looked up. You knew, he said, and the question sat between us like a coin. I do now, I answered. He swallowed. So you are angry because I am not your son. He flinched as he said it, as if the sentence had teeth. I am not angry because of your DNA, I said. And the calm in my voice rang like a note that had finally found its pitch. I am angry because I raised you. I am angry because when the time came for you to stand up and claim me in a room where everyone could hear, you sat down. I am angry because you watched them push me into a kitchen and you did not open your mouth. Not a word, not a gesture, nothing. His eyes hit the stack of invoices, fled, returned. Emily said it would be better for the photos, he murmured. She said it would be cleaner. She said it would be less complicated. I did not think you would take it this way. I laughed once. A small sound with no humor in it. You did not think. That is exactly the problem. You did not think about me. You did not think about the years that taught you to breathe. The nights I traded sleep for a paycheck. The mornings I stitched buttons on with a bus schedule ticking in my head. You did not think that a mother who paid for the room might want to be allowed inside it. He leaned back, ran both hands over his face. The gesture did not make him young again. It only revealed the man who wanted outcomes without the discomfort of ownership. I walked to the mantel and picked up an empty frame. It was lighter than it looked. This held your kindergarten photo, I said softly. You had a gap where your front tooth should be. You ran off the stage and jumped into my arms even though the teacher told you to wait your turn. I set the empty frame down on the shelf and turned back to him. I am done holding on to versions of you that no longer include me. He winced like something sharp had found him. The room inhaled and exhaled once. He started again, the way people do when they are scanning for the right combination of words to unlock a door. I am sorry, he said. The words slid across the coffee table and bumped against the box. They were smaller than the space they needed to fill. I nodded as if I had heard the squeak of a hinge that would not open. I lifted the lid, closed it, pushed the box toward him. These are yours. Every receipt, every proof, every reminder of what you asked for. Take your history. He hesitated, and in the hesitation was the whole map of our recent years. My work, his comfort, my habit of making it easy. I did not move. He took the box. He stood. At the doorway, he turned with his eyes, asking me to offer a line he could climb back across. You always said I was your whole world, he said. The sentence was accurate, and it was a record of a mistake. You were, I said, and now I am finally mine. He left. The door closed with the click a latch makes when it has been waiting to fulfill its function. In the quiet that followed, my legs felt like pillars planted in bedrock. There was no trembling in my hands. I walked back into the living room where the mantel waited without accusation. The sun widened across the floor, a clean stripe with dust dancing through it on small air currents. I could smell the faint echo of rosemary from the dinner 2 nights before. I went to the kitchen and washed 1 coffee cup and set it upside down on a towel. The ordinary work of rinsing and placing felt like a hymn that does not need words to be true. Later, when I checked the phone, there were messages that tried different keys. Hurt, defense, explanation. A voicemail from him that used the phrase, "You embarrassed us," as if I had not been embarrassed first and thoroughly. I did not reply. I had finally understood that my silence could be a sentence that ends a paragraph rather than a void that begs to be filled. I put the phone away and stepped onto the porch with a glass of water that caught the light and made it dance on the wood rail. The roses were full and arrogant. A breeze slid across my skin like a benediction. Inside, the table held only a vase and a square of sunlight. The letters were back in the red folder, not buried, not displayed, simply present. I had no interest in vengeance. I had interest in proportion. It felt like a different kind of mathematics, one that had eluded me when love was a ledger I always balanced in other people's favor. Now the numbers added up. Take back your costs. Keep your peace. Refuse the seat that insults you. Build the table that needs your hands. I thought about the kitchen chair at the wedding and realized that I had already rewritten it. A chair is still a chair, but the woman who sits in it determines what it means. In their photograph, I had been a problem solved by a door. In my life, I had become the person who opens and closes doors with intention. I stood barefoot on my own floor and felt the fact of it. I had waited for apologies like weather that never arrives. I would not wait anymore. The forecast was in my hands. A car passed. The bird returned to the gutter and hopped along it with the cheerful insistence of creatures who do not concern themselves with our narratives. I smiled without performance. The day was just a day again, and that felt like a gift I had given myself in full. The phone learned my rhythm and then stopped trying to teach me its own. After he left with the box and the door sealed the afternoon with a clean click, messages arrived in flurries and then thinned into a hush. There is a particular silence that follows panic, a kind of weather where the sky looks freshly washed and the air tastes like a decision. I walked through it barefoot, the boards cool under my feet, and I felt that silence claim the corners of the house as if it had been paying rent all along. On the porch, a bouquet waited in the heat. Carnations, the cheap kind, already curling at the edges as if they were rehearsing the act of apology and had given up halfway through. There was no card. A kindness without a signature is not kindness. It is a request to guess at virtue. I lifted the plastic wrapping and felt the trapped air puff against my face, damp and slightly sour. I carried them not into the kitchen, not to a vase, but along the side path to the trash bin and laid them down as gently as you put a child to bed. I did not owe penance to a gesture that cost less than gas to drive it here. Inside, I turned the phone face down on the counter and let it hum to itself. I opened my laptop and posted a single photo to the place where people go to scrapbook their better versions. It was not the chandelier. It was not the floral arch. It was not a smiling couple curated to convince acquaintances that love can be staged and still be real. It was a picture of the check. The line where my signature curved like a swallow, the numbers arranged in a small, brutal sentence. I blurred the account, not the truth. Then I closed the computer and walked away from the explosion before it bloomed. The first notifications came like hail on a tin roof, quick and mean. Then the pattern changed. The comments turned strange and soft and furious and helpful, the way a crowd sounds when half of them are craning their necks and the other half are already pushing forward. People I once worked with, people who knew me when my name included "and her boy," neighbors I waved at and never invited inside. The responses made a chorus out of 1,000 different keys. Some asked for context, like the story owed them footnotes. Some defended me with zeal that felt like borrowing a sword. Some made that small, brave sound that happens when a person recognizes a wound in someone else and realizes they have the same scar. One of them wrote, "This broke my heart, and I have never related to anything more. Thank you for teaching us we do not have to stay quiet." I stood at the sink with my hands braced on the cool edge and read that line 3 times until it felt like a bowl I could lift with both hands and drink from. The quiet that followed was not lack. It was space. I filled it with errands because errands are the choreography of normal life, and I needed repetition to prove to myself that I had not been exiled from it. The grocery store made its usual chapel out of fluorescent light and predictable aisles. I found myself in the bakery section because grief and sugar often share a shelf. Diane was there, my cousin from the wedding, her hair pinned back with the same clip she had fiddled with at the church. She smiled in a subdued way and then crossed the linoleum with the posture of someone inventing a reason to be standing where you are. "Are you okay?" she asked, and the last word wobbled, an apology wearing polite shoes. I looked at her and remembered the line of her profile not turning toward the kitchen door. "Were you?" I asked instead, watching me sit in the back. She flushed, then her face softened in defeat. I thought maybe it was a mix-up. I thought maybe you chose to sit there." "No," I said, and I did not make the word cruel. I let it be precise. "You did not think. That is all." The pause that followed was a bridge wide enough to drive a truck through. "I am sorry," she said at last. "It was wrong." She seemed grateful to place the sentence between us like an offering, and for a small second, I accepted it, as if mercy were a muscle that could warm again after too long in the cold. When I came home, there was a new stillness on the porch, not contrite, not performative, simply present. The house smelled like lemon oil from the cloth I had used on the mantel a day earlier, and it made everything shine with a light that did not ask permission. I poured water into a glass and watched it catch the sun on its curve. The letters on the table did not cast long shadows anymore. They lay flat, ordinary as a utility bill. I stacked them, slid them into the red folder, and did not hide it. I left it in the drawer where important things live when they no longer govern you. At noon, the doorbell rang. Not him. A neighbor with a misdelivered package and a story about raccoons. We stood on the porch and traded harmless sweetness in the language of weather and wildlife, and I realized that I had not participated in small talk for days. It felt like stretching a limb that had fallen asleep. He left with a wave, and I watched him cross the lawn with the easy gait of a man who does not carry anyone else's narrative. I envied and forgave him in the same breath. The messages slowed to a few per hour, then a few per day. Someone wanted to know if I had meant to cancel the brunch. Someone wanted to tell me that their daughter had done something similar, though not as extreme, which made me laugh out loud, a bright sound that startled me with its volume. Some were demands disguised as questions. Some were apologies disguised as logistics. I did not answer. I was learning the difference between ignoring and preserving. The first says you do not matter. The second says I do. In the evening, I cooked in the uncomplicated way I had envied in other kitchens. The recipe was a postcard I once sent myself and never read. Lemon butter, roasted tomatoes, garlic that browned if you stood firm and did not rush it. I ate at the table with the blue cloth and did not save a seat for anyone who did not ask. The fork tapped the plate like a metronome. I lit a candle not because anyone would be impressed, but because I liked how the flame warmed the stainless steel until it looked like kindness. I made a second list. Not groceries, not budgets. I wrote the names of places I had promised myself I would go, and then set aside because the timing was not right, or the money needed to go to a newer pair of cleats or a miracle spent at the pharmacy. The art museum on the edge of town where the room of landscapes made you feel like an extra vertebra had been added to your spine. The botanical garden with the winter greenhouse that turned January green. The river trail where people older than me walked and did not apologize for their breath. I added a concert in the park that would not be glossy, but would be music on a lawn with ants and people and the sound of summer lying down to rest. I circled all of them. Before bed, I stood in the doorway of the room where the box had sat and felt the clean absence of it. The mantel was an honest line again. The photos in their towels did not scratch at me from the hall closet. They slept. I slept. When morning came, it arrived without that old squeeze around my heart that had taught me to wake waiting for need. Birds wrote their noisy little declarations in the maple. Light fell across the kitchen tile and moved like a sundial while the kettle warmed. I poured coffee, black and strong, and tasted it without flinching. I stepped onto the porch and watched the neighborhood blink itself awake. A runner passed. A child on a bike wobbled and recovered. Somewhere, a dog believed in the mailman as a moral crisis. I breathed and felt the breath enter places that had been crowded by other people's expectations. I did not think of the kitchen at the wedding. Or rather, I thought of it as a room I had left and closed behind me. There is a difference between being pushed out and choosing to step through. One bruises, the other strengthens. I was done with bruises. The blue tablecloth waited for another dinner that would be set for exactly as many chairs as I wanted. The phone lay quiet, a tamed animal content to sleep in a patch of sun. The check photo continued to gather comments I was not reading. The letters belonged to the drawer. The roses bloomed in their own unruly way, unbothered by my narratives or anyone else's. I lifted my glass to the morning's plain, forgiving light, and whispered something that felt like a vow sworn to my own name. It was not dramatic. It did not require witnesses. I said it anyway. Enough. The house knew what to do with laughter when it returned. It carried it down the hall and let it bounce once against the framed doorway, then sent it rolling across the living room like marbles on polished wood. It was not loud. It was not performative. It filled space the way warm bread fills a kitchen. The scent of garlic and rosemary drifted in slow waves. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, a glass in my hand, feeling heat rise gently from the oven and thinking of nothing except whether the vegetables had reached the right softness at the edges. I was not waiting to be summoned. I was not straining to hear if my name would be said in the other room. I set the platter down and the light shone on the oil like a ribbon. We ate with the simple focus of people who intend to enjoy what is in front of them. The table wore its blue cloth like a sky that had decided to move inside for the night. Plates were mismatched but clean. Napkins were folded into imperfect fans that pleased me because they were made by my hands for myself. Conversation moved in arcs and loops. Someone told the story of the neighbor who locked himself out in his underwear again. Everyone pretended it was new because not everything needs to be original to be kind. I watched the faces around the table and understood something precise. I understood that attention is a currency. I understood how easily I had spent it on storms that did not water me. Claire raised her glass and the room gathered itself. To choosing yourself, she said. To knowing the difference between love and usefulness. To sitting down at your own table because you said it, not because you were told there was no space anywhere else. The glasses touched with a soft ring that felt like a bell far away on a still morning. I stood without thinking, and words arrived with the ease of breath. To the women who built the room and were asked to wait outside it, I said. To the ones who were told they were off theme. To those who stayed quiet because quiet kept the peace, until peace became a wall. May our silence, when we choose it, be the door we close, not the lock they turn. The toast did not float away. It settled somewhere sturdy. Then we went back to second helpings and the kind of laughter that leaks out of eyes and makes you reach for a napkin. It felt like discovering a muscle that had finally healed. No one asked me to cast myself as an inspiration. No one asked me for a speech that would make them feel better about anything. There is a relief in doing nothing but existing where you are wanted. When the night was finished and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I stood alone in the kitchen and let the quiet rise. It did not feel like the old quiet, which used to swallow me whole while I tried to name why I felt small. This quiet fit the room. I wiped the counter with a slow hand and did not hurry the cloth. The letter lay exactly where I had decided it would rest when guests arrived. Not hidden, not displayed. Simply there, a document with no power to detonate what I had built. I turned off the light, and the house exhaled with me, long and even. Morning came like a curtain being opened in a theater that has no audience except the person who unlocked the door. I woke to birds writing their urgent little notes in the maple and light moving across the floor with the confidence of water. There was no first instinct to check for messages. There was no internal plea for a kinder version of what had already been done. I made coffee and drank it hot and black beside the window while the street invented its day. A runner went by with steady knees. A child laughed at nothing except the fact that the wheels on a bike can keep turning if you trust them to. He did not call. I did not wait for him to. Waiting had become a chair in a room that no longer existed in my floor plan. I walked to the mantel and felt the truth of its clean line. The photographs slept in their towels in the closet. They were memories, not obligations, not demands. The box that had left with him had taken the last of the ledger feeling. I was not in debt to the past anymore. I was not charging interest on pain I could never collect. I took the list of places I had written before bed and put it in my purse. It was not a grand itinerary. It did not require anyone else's enthusiasm to matter. I went to the museum and stood in front of a landscape where the painter had made a river run with a trick of light and patience. I breathed for a long time and felt my spine understand why someone would devote hours to a horizon line. I went to the botanical garden and let humidity wrap my skin while plants that would die in my yard thrived without apology. I walked the river trail, let my steps measure what remained, and discovered that there was more than I had guessed. At home, I made lunch because it was noon and not because anyone else required feeding. I sat at the table and ate slowly, tasting lemon and salt and the fact that no part of the day had asked me to disappear. The phone rested in a square of sun on the counter with the lazy contentment of a cat. I let it sleep. When I finally lifted it, there were messages that attempted new shapes. I am confused. I am disappointed. I am embarrassed. I am sorry. None of them touched the hinge of the hurt. None of them included the sentence that mattered. I chose not to see you. I set the device down again. Silence answered what language could not reach. A week became something else. The rhythm of daily life placed itself in my hands and let me conduct. I worked, I cooked, I read a novel that did not improve me in any measurable way, and loved it for that reason. I bought a pair of shoes I did not need, because beauty is a reason that does not require footnotes. I watered the roses and allowed myself to like their arrogance. I made a smaller dinner, then another, inviting different names each time, all people who had shown me, in small consistent ways, that they saw me without needing to be told how. Once, in the middle of a quiet afternoon, I took the red folder out and read the letters again. They were the same. Their power was not. I had believed for years that truth, once discovered, must be eruptions and consequences. These truths had become a map I understood how to fold into a pocket. Not a secret, not a banner. A reference I could consult when old habits tried to write me into corners. On a late Sunday, I sat on the porch with a thin sweater and a cup of tea that steamed into the cool air. The street had given itself to evening. A neighbor waved on his way to his own chosen kitchen. Somewhere down the block, a radio played a song from a summer that felt as far away as the moon. I thought of him, my son, a human being I had loved beyond reason and record. I did not harden. I did not soften. I let the thought pass across my mind like weather. If he wanted to return, he would need to use a door I had not yet seen him build, made of words that fit the frame. If he never did, I would still have this porch, this air, This life that was finally not contingent on someone else's invitation. Inside, the table waited with its blue cloth folded and ready. I ran my hand across it and felt the weave. I set a single place and ate without hurry. The candle threw a modest circle of light that warmed the silver and the curve of the glass. When I lifted my fork, my hand did not shake. When I set it down, my breath was steady. I had become the main character in my own life, not by applause, not by speech, but by practice. Practice is the form that freedom takes when you live with it long enough to trust it. I washed the plate, turned off the kitchen light, and walked through a house that did not hide me. In the bedroom, I opened the window a few inches and let the night slip in. It smelled like cut grass and something sweet that blooms after dark. I got into bed and lay on my back without bracing for anything. The ceiling waited without judgment. The fan moved. I closed my eyes and the quiet did not ask for payment. It simply covered me like a promise I had made to myself and finally kept. There are moments in life when silence is forced upon you, when people erase you from the picture, when they push you out of the room you built, when your worth is measured only in money or convenience. For years, I believed my value lived in what I gave, in the meals I cooked, the nights I stayed awake, the sacrifices I folded quietly into every corner of my son's life. I believed love was enough, that patience and endurance could win me a place at the table I had paid for. But on that wedding night, staring through a swinging door at a celebration I had funded but was not welcome to join, I learned the most painful truth of all. Love without respect becomes servitude. And yet, that night was not the end of me. It was the beginning. With each decision to cancel, with each receipt boxed, with each photograph taken off the wall, I was not destroying my family. I was reclaiming myself. I was no longer the ghost in the kitchen. I was the woman who built a new table, one where every chair was filled with people who saw me, who valued me, who raised a glass not out of obligation but out of gratitude. The truth is, betrayal will come. From friends, from family, even from the children you raised with your last ounce of strength. But betrayal does not define you, your response does. You can sit in the shadows, waiting for recognition that will never come, or you can stand, steady, and walk out the door into your own light. I chose to stop waiting. I chose to stop begging for a place in someone else's vision. And when I finally lifted my glass at my own table, surrounded by chosen family, I understood something no rejection could take away. Dignity is not given, it is claimed. Power is not handed over, it is seized. And silence, when it is yours, is not weakness, it is control. So to every mother, every woman, every soul who has ever been hidden behind a door, I say this. You do not need their permission to exist. You do not need their invitation to belong. You are already enough, and you always were. If this story has found you, if it has reminded you of your own strength, your own scars, your own quiet rebellions, then know this. You are not alone. We tell these stories because truth has power. We tell them because lies can silence, but only for a while. And we tell them because someone, somewhere, is waiting to hear the words that will free them. This is not just my story. It is yours. It is ours. And it is only the beginning. Subscribe now to Silent Lies, because the stories no one wants told are the ones that matter most.